Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are going to get into a subject that, if you've been paying any attention to the headlines, feels like it has just done a complete 180 on us.
It's a massive reversal.
It really is.
Yeah.
Think back. If you grew up any time in the last, say, 50 or 60 years, what was the big, scary nightmare scenario for the future of humanity? What were we all supposed to be terrified of?
Oh, without a doubt, it was the population bomb.
Exactly. The population bomb. I remember seeing those charts in school, the ones with the vertical lines just shooting straight up into the stratosphere.
The hockey stick graph of human population.
Yes. And the whole narrative was that we were, frankly, breeding ourselves into oblivion. This deep Malthusian fear that 6 billion, then 7 billion people would just consume the planet like a swarm of locusts.
It was all about scarcity. Running out of food, running out of water, running out of space.
Soylent Green was the future, right?
Yeah.
Just no room left to breathe.
And that wasn't a fringe idea. That was the defining anxiety of the 20th century. You had Paul Ehrlich's book in 1968, which basically predicted mass starvation in the 70s and 80s.
I remember that one.
And it drove everything. It drove global policy, it drove foreign aid, it shaped the entire cultural conversation for decades.
Right. So fast forward to today. Here we are. We just passed the 8 billion people mark. But if you look at the sort of bingo card of what keeps world leaders up at night, overpopulation isn't even on it.
It's not on the card. It's been replaced by its exact opposite.
It's completely flipped. They're not panicking about too many people anymore. Now they're panicking about empty cradles.
It is a truly remarkable pivot. We've gone from a century defined by the fear of an explosion to this sudden gripping anxiety about a demographic ice age.
Demographic ice age. That is a chilling term. That sounds like what happens before an extinction event.
It is. And it's not just a clever metaphor somebody came up with. It was actually used by the former Hungarian president, Katalin Novak.
Oh, really?
Yeah. She described childlessness as an epidemic that was spreading across the globe, threatening the very survival of nations. And believe me, she is not the only one losing sleep over this.
So this is a widespread concern among a certain type of leader.
It's global. We're seeing this massive shift where the rate of growth has collapsed in so many developed nations that the new existential threat isn't that we'll run out of food, but that we'll run out of, people.
Okay, but I have to stop you there for a second, because to the average person, and to me, that just sounds, frankly, a little insane.
I get it. It feels counterintuitive.
It does. We literally just crossed 8 billion. My commute is packed. The housing market is impossible because there's too much demand. How can you possibly tell me we're running out of people? It feels like gaslighting to say the world is getting empty.
And that's the intuitiveness trap. You see the crowd, but you're not seeing the age of the crowd. We went from about 1.6 billion people in 1900 to over 8 billion today. That's a staggering explosion. But demography is like a supertanker. It takes a very long time to turn, but once that turn starts, the momentum is immense.
The ship is still moving forward from its old momentum.
Exactly. While the total number, the headline number, is still high, the engine that's driving that growth, the birth rate, is sputtering out. In a lot of places, it's already dead.
So the car is still rolling, but the foot is completely off the gas pedal.
The foot is off the gas, and in some countries, they are slamming on the brakes. And that is what this deep dive is all about today. We are going to unpack this whole phenomenon of demographic panic.
Okay.
We need to understand why world leaders are freaking out, look at the incredibly dark history of what happens when governments try to control women's bodies to fix these numbers, and also, there's this really strange political alliance that's starting to emerge.
You mean the strange bedfellows situation that's in the notes?
Exactly that. You're seeing this synthesis between Silicon Valley tech billionaires, your Elon Musk types, and very traditional right-wing nationalist politicians.
They seem like they should be on opposite ends of the spectrum.
You'd think so. They have completely different motivations, different worldviews, but they have landed on the exact same conclusion.
Which is?
We need more babies.
And we are definitely going to get into why they think that. But I want to start with that event you mentioned, the Demographic Summit in Budapest, because that feels like it really sets the scene for who cares about this and why.
It absolutely does. If you looked at the guest list for the Budapest Demographic Summit, it was like a who's who of European conservative and nationalist leadership.
Like who?
You had Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy. You had Alexander Vucic, the President of Serbia. You had religious leaders, conservative intellectuals. And then, holding a workshop, you had someone like Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson. Okay. So that paints a very, very specific political picture. This panic is largely a concern of the political right, isn't it?
Largely, yes. Not exclusively. But the framing of the panic is very much a right-wing concern. They see this not just as, an economic problem or a numbers game.
Right. It's something more.
For them, it's a threat to the survival of their specific cultures, their nations, their ethnos. They look at the empty nurseries and they don't just see future economic decline, they see the end of their civilization, the end of their history.
So the fundamental question we have to try and answer today is, are they right? I mean, should we actually be losing sleep over this, or is this just a convenient political tool to push a certain kind of social agenda?
Well, to answer that, we have to put the politics aside for just a moment and look at the cold, hard math. We have to understand what demographers call the stationary model.
Okay, hit me with it. I'm a demographer for the day. I want a perfectly stable world, no growth, no shrinking. What is the magic number?
The magic number is 2.1.
2.1. Okay. The 2, I get. One for mom, one for dad. You replace yourselves. That seems pretty straightforward.
That's the replacement part, exactly.
But the point 1, what's the point 1? Are we talking about a fractional child? I don't understand.
No, you can't have a tenth of a child. The point 1 is, it's the buffer. It's the system's error margin.
An error margin for what?
It accounts for the tragic reality that not every child who is born will survive to reproductive age.
Yeah.
In a perfect world, with zero childhood mortality, the number would be exactly 2.0.
But that's not the world we live in.
Not at all. Accidents happen, diseases happen.
Yeah.
So demographers add that little 0.1 to the equation to make sure that for every 2 adults, there are 2 new adults who can then have children of their own.
Right.
Keeps the line perfectly flat.
So in this perfect stationary model, births equal deaths. It's a steady state.
It is. And for government planners, for economists, this model is paradise. It makes planning a society incredibly easy.
How so?
Well, you know exactly how many schools you need to build for the next decade. You know exactly how many hospital beds to budget for. With a high degree of certainty, how much tax revenue is coming in to pay for pensions.
It's all about predictability.
Complete predictability. It assumes no migration. It assumes stable life expectancy. It is the perfect, boring, stable state that governments dream of.
But the world is rarely boring or predictable, and I'm guessing from the tone of this conversation that we are nowhere near 2.1.
We are not. The global average is falling fast, but it's the distribution of that fall that's the real story. The disparity is just massive.
Okay, so let's take a little tour of that global map, because I think a lot of people might assume that this demographic decline thing is happening everywhere equally, but that's not true, is it?
Not at all. If you look at sub-Saharan Africa, for example, the demographic engine is still roaring.
Still in the population bomb era.
Absolutely. You look at countries like Niger, Somalia, Chad, the Democratic Republic of Congo, they're still averaging around 6.1 children per woman.
6.1. I mean, that's a huge family by modern Western standards. It's hard to even imagine.
It's triple the replacement rate.
Yeah.
That means you are dealing with rapid exponential growth. So for those regions, the old narrative still feels very real. They're struggling to build schools and hospitals fast enough to keep up with this massive youth bulge.
So they have the exact opposite problem of Europe.
The mirror image. They have too many young people and not enough jobs or infrastructure. But then you shift your gaze just a little bit on the map.
You cross the Mediterranean.
Right. You get to Europe, and the numbers just collapse. The European Union average is about 1.5.
1.5. That's way, way below the magic 2.1.
Miles below. And remember, that's just the average. You have countries like France on the high end of that, for reasons we'll get into later. But then you look at Spain, they're down to 1.15.
Wow.
And the Netherlands, where we are, sits somewhere in the middle, about 1.46.
So let's just do the quick math on that. If your birth rate is 1.4 or 1.15, that means for every generation, for every couple, they aren't even replacing themselves. The next generation is going to be smaller by, what, 30, 40%?
Roughly, yes.
Yeah.
Each new generation is significantly smaller than the one that came before it.
Yeah.
That's not a stable line. That's a downward spiral. But then you go to East Asia.
And this is where it gets really extreme.
This is where the numbers fall off a cliff.
We're talking about South Korea and Japan?
South Korea currently has the lowest birth rate in the world. It is hovering around 0.75 children per woman.
0.75. That's not even one child per woman. That's mathematically terrifying if you're a government planner.
It is. It means the next generation will be less than half the size of the current one. If that rate holds, The population effectively gets cut in half every 25 years or so.
That's unsustainable.
It's a demographic implosion. And here's where it gets really, really challenging. Places like Japan and South Korea combine these rock-bottom birth rates with the highest life expectancies on the planet.
So people are living longer than ever.
Exactly. The average life expectancy in Japan is around 85 years. So you have this collision of two powerful forces.
Which creates what they call a super-aged society.
A super-aged society. It's an inverted pyramid. You have this massive, top-heavy structure of millions and millions of retirees in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and a tiny, shrinking sliver of young people at the bottom trying to hold the whole thing up.
And this brings us right to the so what question, because I can still hear a listener thinking, okay, fewer people, sounds good to me, less traffic, maybe houses get cheaper, maybe my wages go up because labor is scarce. What's the catastrophe here?
And it's a fair question. On the surface, it sounds nice, more room for everyone. Environmentalists might argue it's great for the planet's carbon footprint. But economically, under our current system, it creates this immense force we call gray pressure.
Gray pressure. Okay, explain that mechanism.
Think about how our modern social safety nets are built. We've moved away from the sort of old world model where your children were your pension.
Right. You had 6 or 7 kids because you hoped 3 or 4 would survive to adulthood and be able to take care of you when you were too old to work the farm.
That was your insurance policy.
Yeah.
If you didn't have kids, you were in serious trouble in old age. That was the brutal reality.
Yeah.
But in the modern welfare state, we outsourced that responsibility to the government. We created Social Security, AOW, state-funded pensions. We made a new social contract.
We said, you don't need kids to support you anymore. The state will do it.
Precisely. But the state isn't magic. It relies on tax revenue from the current generation of workers to pay for the current generation of retirees. It's a pay-as-you-go system. The money you pay in taxes today isn't being put in a little box with your name on it for the future.
No, it's immediately paid out to your grandmother.
It's paid out to your grandmother. It's a massive transfer of wealth from the young to the old.
It's basically a Ponzi scheme that only works as long as there's an endless supply of new investors. I mean, workers.
That's a cynical but not entirely inaccurate way to put it, yes. The system works beautifully when you have, say, 5 workers for every 1 retiree.
Yeah.
That's a broad, healthy tax base. But when that base of the pyramid starts to shrink, when you only have 2 workers for every retiree, and the top of the pyramid is expanding because people are living for 20 or 30 years post-retirement, the math just breaks. It falls apart.
And it's not just the pensions, is it? It has to be healthcare, too.
Healthcare is the other, even bigger part of the equation.
Yeah.
A healthy 30-year-old costs the state very little. Maybe a checkup, a flu shot, maybe they break a leg.
Right.
An 85-year-old requires vastly more expensive care. Chronic illnesses, surgeries, long-term care facilities, expensive medications. So you have skyrocketing costs colliding head-on with plummeting revenue.
Which puts an impossible squeeze on that shrinking group of young people.
A massive squeeze. Their taxes have to go up, or the benefits for the elderly have to be cut. There's no other way to balance the books.
And ironically, raising their taxes makes it even harder for them to feel like they can afford to have children themselves.
And there's your feedback loop. It becomes a demographic death spiral.
Okay, so we've established the problem. The math is broken. But the big mystery, and the part I really want to dig into, is why. Why did we stop having kids? Because when I look at this wealth paradox in the notes, it seems completely backwards.
It is the great contradiction of demography, and it's the one that stumps people the most.
Yeah.
The logical assumption is that as people get richer, as they have more resources, food security, stable housing, they'd feel more confident and have more children.
Right. I can finally afford to feed 5 kids, so I'll have 5 kids. That's how it works in the rest of the animal kingdom. If there's a surplus of food, the population grows. Why are humans the exception?
Because for humans, it's not just about survival anymore. The data shows the exact opposite of what you'd expect. Prosperity correlates almost perfectly with fewer children. As soon as a country gets richer, its birth rate crashes.
But why? Is it just selfishness? People wanting to spend money on themselves instead of on diapers?
That's the easy critique, but it's not really what the data shows. It's a fundamental shift in strategy. There are a few layers to it. First, as we talked about, the welfare state removed the brute economic necessity of children for your own survival.
You don't need them anymore for your old age.
You don't. And second, and this is probably the biggest factor of all, is female emancipation.
The pill?
The pill, access to contraception, the legalization of abortion, and crucially, women entering the workforce and higher education in mass numbers.
It gave women control.
It gave individuals, particularly women, control over their own reproductive lives. It turned having children from a biological destiny into a conscious choice. And it turns out, when you give people that choice, many choose to have fewer children or to start later in life so they can pursue a career or education first.
But there's another layer to this, right? Something more psychological that explains why even very wealthy people feel like they can't afford more kids.
Yes. And this is the intensive parenting trap.
I find this part fascinating sociologically. The idea that in modern wealthy societies, the standard for what it means to be a good parent has just gone through the roof.
Completely. We're not just raising kids to survive anymore. We're not just putting food on the table. We are trying to create a homo universalis.
The Renaissance child.
The Renaissance child, exactly.
I feel this pressure. You see it everywhere. The kid has to speak 3 languages, play a classical instrument, be the captain of the soccer team, go to coding camp in the summer, and have a portfolio ready for an Ivy League school by the time they're 10.
That's it. The expectation is that you will personally curate a perfect childhood, giving them every possible advantage in an incredibly competitive world.
And that takes a staggering amount of resources.
An immense amount. Time, money, emotional energy. Sociologists call this the quantity-quality trade-off. Parents decide, consciously or not, to have fewer children, but invest everything they have into those 1 or 2.
It's like putting all your eggs in one basket, but you spend all your time making sure that basket is gold-plated and shock-proof.
And here is a wild statistic that really drives this home. Studies show that mothers today, even mothers who work full-time jobs, spend more one-on-one, engaged time with their children than stay-at-home mothers did in the 1950s.
Wait, really? How is that even possible? I thought the 1950s was the golden age of the stay-at-home mom.
It was, but the style of parenting was completely different. Back then, parenting often meant telling the kids to go play outside and don't come back till dinner while mom managed the household.
It was more passive supervision.
Very passive. Today, parenting is an active, engaged, nonstop job. It's helping with homework, it's driving to and from practice, it's emotional coaching, it's managing their social lives. It is exhausting. The bar for being a good parent has been raised so high that the thought of doing that for 3 or 4 kids is just, it's overwhelming.
That makes perfect sense. It's not just about the financial cost. It's the time cost, the mental load. Okay, but what about some of the other reasons we hear about? What about climate anxiety? I hear people in my generation say it all the time. I can't bring a child into a world that's burning.
And that's a very real sentiment. People feel that anxiety. And it's a common thing to hear in the media or in casual conversations. But when you dig into the hard data, most researchers are pretty skeptical that this is the primary statistical driver of the drop.
So it's more of a justification after the fact.
It can be. It often acts as a socially acceptable rationalization for a decision that's really being driven by more immediate economic factors or lifestyle choices. It's sometimes easier to say, I'm doing this for the planet, than I'm doing this because I can't afford a bigger apartment and I also want to be able to go on vacation.
That said, real-world shocks do have an effect.
Oh, absolutely. Major shocks like pandemics, disease outbreaks, and wars act as very effective, if temporary, contraceptives.
We're seeing that play out in Ukraine right now.
We are, and the situation there is just tragic. You have young women in Ukraine who are caught in this terrible psychological bind.
What do you mean?
On the one hand, there's immense societal pressure. They're being told, if you're not on the front lines, your duty is to produce the next generation of citizens and soldiers. There's this nationalist pressure to reproduce for the survival of the nation.
But at the same time...
But the reality of war, the instability, the constant fear, the men being killed at the front, it causes them to delay. How can you plan for a family in that environment?
And that really brings us to what might be the single biggest factor of all, just delay.
At the end of the day, that's probably it. We're simply delaying all the traditional markers of adulthood. People are buying houses later, getting stable jobs later, finding long-term partners later. And biology, it doesn't wait for your career to take off.
The biological clock is still ticking.
It is. And if you start trying for a family at 35 instead of 25, your window of opportunity is just much, much smaller. You might still want 3 kids, but you simply run out of time.
So we have all these personal choices, economic pressures, cultural shifts, and biological realities all conspiring to push the numbers down. But the reaction to this from governments, that's where things get really geopolitical.
Right.
Because for these world leaders, this isn't just about pensions and nurseries. It's about power.
And that brings us to this incredibly charged concept of demographic rearmament.
It sounds like something from a futuristic war movie, rearmament. That's the exact word that the French president Emmanuel Macron used, isn't it?
It is, and you have to believe that choice of words was very deliberate. Calling for rearmament frames childbirth not as a personal choice or a family joy, but as a civic duty, a duty to the state.
It sounds like war because, in their minds, it is a kind of war.
Exactly. They view their population as a measure of national vitality. It's a resource, a sign of energy, and ultimately, it's about military potential. A nation with no young men can't field an army.
And this kind of rhetoric is ramping up everywhere, not just in France.
No, it's a global trend. Look at Vladimir Putin in Russia. Russia has been in a state of demographic collapse for years, sky-high mortality rates, especially for men, and a very low birth rate. He's been offering cash bonuses for births. He even revived the old Soviet-era title of Mother Heroine for women who have 10 or more children.
10 kids.
10 kids. You get a medal and 1,000,000 rubles. But some analysts have suggested something much darker is at play.
With the war in Ukraine.
Yes. That the invasion of Ukraine was, in part, a demographic land grab.
A land grab for people, not just territory.
Think about it. Russia's population is shrinking and aging. By invading and occupying parts of Ukraine, they didn't just seize land. They acquired millions of people, many of them ethnically and linguistically similar. There have been credible reports of them kidnapping Ukrainian children and deporting them to Russia to be raised as Russians.
That is horrifying. It literally turns human beings into a resource to be plundered.
It does. And you hear echoes of this anxiety everywhere. In Turkey, President Erdogan has said that low birth rates are a bigger existential threat than terrorism. In South Korea, the president has declared the situation a national emergency. Here in the U.S., Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has called it a major national security threat.
But I have to ask, does population size really equal power anymore? I mean, in the 21st century, isn't it more about technology and economic strength? India just passed China in total population, but no one would argue India is more powerful than China right now.
And that is the great paradox. You're right. In a purely objective sense, a massive population doesn't automatically guarantee power. A small, technologically advanced country like Israel can be a regional superpower.
So why the obsession with raw numbers?
Because leaders, especially nationalist leaders, feel that a shrinking population means a loss of national relevance. It feels like your nation is a dying star. It feels like you're losing your energy, your future. They look at the numbers and they don't see a transition, they see an erasure. Are you still a superpower if you're shrinking? Or are you just becoming a living museum?
And this anxiety, this feeling, seems to have a very specific political flavor to it. It's concentrated on the right.
It is.
Yeah.
And this is where we see that really fascinating and strange political synthesis happening. You have the tech bros on one side and the religious conservatives on the other.
The Elon Musk contingent.
Elon Musk is the absolute poster child for this. He's fathered, something like 14 children that we know of. He is the embodiment of the tech bro pro-natalist view.
And for him, what's the motivation?
For him, it's almost a sci-fi problem. He looks at declining birth rates and he sees a civilizational collapse. He genuinely worries that if we don't have enough smart people, we won't have the collective brain power to solve big problems, to maintain our complex technological society, and of course, to get to Mars.
So for him, humans are like the processors in a giant supercomputer. If you don't have enough nodes in the network, the whole system just slows down and crashes.
That's a pretty good analogy for you.
Yeah.
He sees it as an innovation and progress issue. And that view aligns perfectly with the traditional conservative view, even though the starting point is completely different.
How so?
Well, traditional conservatives value traditional family structures and gender roles. They look at low birth rates and say, see, this is what happens when you let feminism go too far and women abandon their natural roles. So their preferred solution, encouraging women to prioritize motherhood over careers, restricting abortion access, it achieves the same goal that the tech bro wants.
More babies.
More babies.
So you get that famous handshake meme. You've got Elon Musk on one side and a traditional religious leader on the other, and they're shaking hands over the shared goal of increasing the population.
Laughs. Precisely. And you see a politician like Donald Trump trying to walk this tightrope. He called himself the fertility president, saying he wants many more beautiful American children. But then he immediately runs into friction with his own religious base over an issue like IVF.
Right, because IVF helps create more babies, which fits the goal, but it often involves discarding embryos, which deeply offends his evangelical supporters.
Exactly. It's a very delicate and often contradictory political balancing act.
So we have the motivation, this deep fear of irrelevance, economic collapse, civilizational decline. That brings us to the next, and frankly, the scariest question. If a government decides it wants more babies or fewer, can they actually make it happen?
History gives us a pretty clear answer to that, and it's a grim one. Governments can, with enough brutality, force the numbers down. That is possible.
But pushing them up.
Pushing them up is much, much harder.
Mm.
And when governments try to use force to do it, it gets incredibly dark, incredibly fast.
Let's start with the pushing down side first. The most famous and extreme example has to be China.
The one-child policy. It began around 1980. At that time, the Chinese government was terrified of mass starvation. They had 1 billion people, and the leadership thought we simply cannot feed everyone if we keep growing at this rate. They wanted to slam the brakes on.
And this wasn't just a suggestion, right? It wasn't a PR campaign saying one is enough.
No, this was state policy enforced with an iron fist. And there's one specific example from the source material that just highlights the sheer brutality of it. In 1991, in one county in Shandong province, the local party officials declared the 100 childless days.
100 childless days. That sounds like the title of a horror movie. What did that actually mean in practice?
It meant that for a 100-day period, from May to August of that year, the local party secretary decreed that to meet their population control quotas, there would be 0 births allowed in the county. 0.
How do you even enforce that?
They hunted down pregnant women. They were arrested, dragged from their homes. They were forced to have abortions, regardless of how far along they were in their pregnancies. They induced labor prematurely. It was a campaign of absolute state violence directed at the female body.
That's just horrific.
It is. And on a purely statistical level, the one-child policy worked, in the cold language of the state. The national birth rate dropped from around 3.0 to 1.22. It did prevent hundreds of millions of births, but it worked too well.
How so?
It created a cultural norm. An entire generation grew up where having only one child was the default, the expectation. And now the Chinese government is shrinking, and they are absolutely desperate to reverse it.
So they're flipping the switch from you can't have kids to please, you must have more kids.
They're trying everything. They're offering subsidies. They're even, in some places, increasing the tax on condoms and other contraceptives to try and make it harder to avoid pregnancy. But you can't just turn the cultural tap back on. People are used to small families now. The policy left a deep scar.
So coercion can stop births, but it might create a problem you can never fix. Okay, but what about the other way? Forcing births up. Has anyone really tried that and succeeded?
Yes. And it's one of the most harrowing stories of the 20th century. Romania, 1966. Decree 770.
This was under the dictator Ceausescu.
Nicolae Ceausescu.
Yeah.
He had this grandiose vision of building a great Romanian nation, and for that he decided he needed more soldiers, more workers, more people. He looked at the birth rate, decided it was too low, and so he acted.
And what did he do?
Almost overnight, with the stroke of a pen, he banned all abortion and all contraception.
Completely illegal for everyone.
Completely illegal.
Yeah.
And he created a massive state surveillance apparatus to enforce it. They had what the people grimly called the menstrual police.
No, you're kidding?
I'm not. State-employed doctors would visit factories and workplaces to conduct gynecological exams on female workers to check for signs of pregnancy. If a woman was found to be pregnant, she was monitored by the state to ensure she carried the baby to term.
That's an unbelievable violation of privacy.
And it didn't stop there. They created a celibacy tax that was levied on any man or woman over 25 who was childless. If you didn't contribute a child to the state, you paid a financial penalty every month.
So what happened? Did the birth rate actually go up?
In the short term, it was a massive success in the cold, brutal eyes of the state. The birth rate exploded. It went from 1.9 to 3.7 almost instantly. The year after the decree, there was a huge baby boom.
That's a staggering jump. So statistically, he got exactly what he wanted.
He got the numbers on the page. But the human cost was catastrophic. Society wasn't ready. There weren't enough hospitals. There weren't enough schools. There wasn't enough housing. And the women were desperate.
They must have turned to a black market.
A huge and dangerous black market for illegal abortions flourished. The stories are gruesome. Women using household chemicals, knitting needles, anything they could to end pregnancies they couldn't afford or didn't want. Thousands and thousands of women died from these botched procedures. Maternal mortality skyrocketed.
And what about the children who were actually born into this?
That is the ultimate tragedy of Ceausescu's children. So many of them were abandoned by families who simply could not feed another mouth. The state orphanages overflowed with tens of thousands of unwanted, neglected children, living in the most squalid conditions imaginable. We've all seen those haunting images from the early 90s after the revolution fell.
The children in the cribs.
Yes. It broke an entire generation. It is the ultimate lesson. You can try to force biology to serve the state, but you will break your society in the process.
It has echoes of the Nazis, too, that obsession they had with not just more births, but specific kinds of births.
Absolutely. The Mother's Cross. The Nazis awarded medals to women bronze for having 4 children, silver for 6, and gold for 8 or more. But there was a very important catch.
There's always a catch.
It wasn't just for any children. They had to be certified Aryan children. And this brings us right to the uncomfortable truth that's lurking just beneath the surface of a lot of this modern demographic panic.
Which is that when leaders say we need more babies, what they often really mean is we need more of our kind of babies.
Exactly. This is where we have to talk about the Great Replacement Theory, or unvolking as it's known in some parts of Europe.
This is that far-right conspiracy theory that claims there's a secret plot by global elites to replace white Christian populations with non-white immigrants.
Yes, it's a baseless and dangerous conspiracy theory, but it fuels a very real political anxiety on the right.
Yeah.
And you see mainstream politicians sometimes use language that winks at it.
Yeah.
Peter Omtzigt, a prominent Dutch politician, made a comment recently that really triggered this specific nerve.
What did he say?
He pointed out factually that the nation of Ethiopia alone generates more new babies in a single year than the entire European Union combined.
Wow. Just one African country versus the entire EU bloc. That's a statistic that really puts the scale of the disparity in perspective.
The statistic itself is true, but the way it's used, the implication when he says something like, I'll let you guess what that means for the future, that feeds directly into that racial anxiety. It frames demography as a zero-sum game between us and them.
And this explains why migration isn't seen as the simple, easy fix by the political liver.
Right. I mean, logically, if you have a labor shortage and not enough young people,
Right.
you just import workers, right? Problem solved.
Economically, yes. If your only goal is to balance the pension books and keep the factories running, migration is the fastest and most efficient solution.
Oh, yeah.
But if your goal is the preservation of what you see as your national culture, your ethno-state, then that solution is the problem. Imported labor doesn't count. It's seen as dilution, not a solution.
We see this exact contrast playing out in Europe right now, don't we?
We do. Just look at the difference between Spain and Italy. Spain currently has a left-wing government. They are openly inviting migrants. Their message is, we need you to save our pension system. Please come, work, pay taxes. It's a very pragmatic economic argument.
And then you have Italy, led by Giorgia Meloni, who was a star speaker at that demographic summit in Budapest. Her public rhetoric is fiercely anti-migrant. But here's the supreme irony. Italy's economy is on its knees, desperate for workers. The business owners in the north of Italy, who are her political base, are begging the government for more staff.
So what do?
So quietly, behind the scenes, Italy is actually allowing a significant number of migrants in, because they have to. The economy would collapse otherwise. But they keep the public-facing rhetoric hostile to satisfy their base.
It's pure policy hypocrisy.
It's what they see as political survival. But it's also worth noting there's a flaw in the migration fixes everything argument from the other side, too.
Which is?
Adaptation. Immigrants aren't a different species. When families move from high-fertility country to a low-fertility country like Germany or the Netherlands, what do you think happens to their birth rate?
It drops.
It drops. Within a generation or two, their fertility patterns converge with the host country's norms. So migration is a temporary patch. It's like a blood transfusion for an aging society. It can keep you going for a while, but it doesn't cure the underlying condition.
So if coercion is a dystopian nightmare and migration is a temporary fix that scares half the electorate, what about the nice approach? The friendly, social democratic way. I always hear people point to Sweden as the model.
Ah, the Swedish mystery.
Free childcare, generous paid paternity and maternity leave, all sorts of family support. Surely that works, right?
This is perhaps the most shocking and, for policymakers, the most depressing finding in all of modern demography. Sweden has done everything right by the textbook. They have built this incredible infrastructure of care to make it as easy as possible to have and raise children.
And the result is?
And yet, their birth rate is still low. It's currently almost the same as the birth rate in the United States, which has practically zero federal support for families.
Wait, get out. So you're telling me all that free daycare and a year of paid leave doesn't actually make people have more kids in the long run?
It definitely improves the quality of life for the parents and children who are there. It's good social policy for humans. But as a tool to significantly raise the national birth rate, it's surprisingly weak.
So what effect does it have?
What you see is that financial incentives, like a baby bonus or subsidized childcare, can cause a temporary blip. People might decide to have a child this year instead of next year to get the benefit, but it doesn't seem to change the total number of children they have over their lifetime.
The big cultural shifts are just too powerful.
The cultural shifts, the lifestyle choices, the desire for that intensive parenting we talked about, those forces seem to outweigh government bribes. At the end of the day, it seems you can't pay people to have more kids than they want.
That feels like we've hit a dead end. So do we just give up? Do we just accept that we're shrinking and that's the future?
Well, there is another path.
Uh-huh.
It's what you might call the Japan model.
And what's the Japan model?
Acceptance and adaptation. Japan has been dealing with this longer than anyone, and they've largely realized they cannot reverse the tide. So instead of fighting it, they're trying to redesign their society to function with fewer older people.
How are they doing that?
They are investing massively in automation and robotics to replace human workers in factories, in elder care, even in some service jobs. They're also changing their labor laws to keep people in the workforce longer, encouraging healthy 70-year-olds to work part-time. They are learning to manage the decline gracefully.
So aging with dignity, but for an entire society.
Exactly. It requires a fundamental rethink of how we structure our economies, which are all based on this assumption of endless growth. But maybe endless growth powered by an endless supply of people just isn't the future.
Before we wrap this up, there's one last point I want to touch on. We've talked a lot about geopolitics, statistics, and national power. But there's a very real human tragedy at the heart of this too, isn't there?
Yes. The UN released a report with a finding that, for me, really hits the hardest. It found that the real fertility crisis isn't the geopolitical one. It's not that nations aren't hitting the magic number 2.1. It's that individual people aren't hitting the number they want for themselves.
What do you mean by that?
The data is pretty stark. It shows that 31% of people over the age of 50 say they had fewer children than they actually wanted to have in their lives.
That's heartbreaking. That's almost 1 in 3 people looking back on their lives with a sense of regret, saying, I wanted a bigger family, but for some reason I couldn't.
Exactly. They couldn't because of infertility, because they couldn't find a partner in time, because of economic instability, because they felt they lacked the support to manage it. The real tragedy isn't that the nation is short on future soldiers or taxpayers. The tragedy is that personal gap between a person's desire and their reality.
That really reframes the entire conversation, doesn't it?
It does. It suggests that the goal shouldn't be demographic rearmament for the state. Maybe the goal should just be removing the barriers that stop people from building the families and living the lives they actually want.
So, to summarize this whole journey, we've gone from feeling a planet that's too crowded to feeling one that's too empty. We've learned that you can't force people to have babies without creating a living hell, and that you can't just bribe them into it either.
And we've learned that while the panic is often political, sometimes racialized, and frequently manipulated by leaders for their own ends, the underlying demographic shift is real. It's probably permanent. The human species is undergoing a fundamental transformation. As a whole, we are getting older, and in many parts of the world, we are getting smaller.
It really is a brave new world, and that leaves me with a final provocative thought for you to chew on. Our entire modern civilization, our pensions, our stock markets, our model of economic growth, our healthcare systems, it's all built on one fundamental assumption: an endless supply of new humans, a pyramid scheme that requires a constantly widening base. If that supply is drying up for good, is it time to stop trying to redesign women's lives to fit the old economy and maybe start redesigning the economy to fit the new reality of our lives?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it?
Thanks for joining us in the deep dive. We'll see you next time.